Module 3.4 will look at the impacts of climate change on buildings and telecommunication infrastructure in Suriname. Let's explore building and telecommunication infrastructure in Suriname. 90% of the Suriname population lives along the coastal plain, meaning along the coastline, with 44% from Paramaribo and 22% from Wanica. 70% of Surinamese live in urban areas, meaning cities. In Paramaribo and Wanica, block material is used for most of the building construction. Related to telecommunications, as of 2019, 14% of people had a fixed broadband subscription, meaning access to internet. 58% of urban and 42% of rural coastal, 22% of rural interior households had access to internet at home. Broadband is reliable on the coast, but less reliable in the interior due to terrain, population, and vegetation density, which has led to inaccessible mobile telecommunication services in the interior of Suriname. Which climate impacts are most concerning for building and telecommunication infrastructure in Suriname? As mentioned in the previous videos, for most of Suriname's infrastructure, the concerning hazards are increases in precipitation, high winds, and sea level rise. Building and telecommunication infrastructure are also vulnerable to climate hazards such as floods, storms, and again high winds, which can cause extensive damage. We will now explore some of the ways climate impacts would affect building and telecommunication infrastructure in Suriname through various impact chains or pathways. Similar to the other videos, I encourage you to pause the video here to follow some of these pathways yourself. Again, you can start by looking at the climate variable or hazard, which is in blue, which leads to an intermediate impact in gray, and then finally a downstream impact or consequence in red. The yellow boxes are showing who or what may be more exposed to the risk, and the green boxes are showing factors that might increase vulnerability. So I encourage you to pause the video here, and then we will explore some of these together. Now that you have hopefully looked at some of the pathways, I will highlight a few that are key for building and telecommunication infrastructure. The main way that building and telecommunication infrastructure is impacted by climate impacts is through loss or damage of the infrastructure. What leads to loss or damage of infrastructure? Similar to the other videos, we are looking at hazards such as more precipitation, higher winds, and sea level rise, which can directly cause loss or damage or drive other climate hazards such as flooding, coastal erosion, more wave action, and more fires. On the coast of Suriname, flooding, erosion, extreme winds, and waves are significant risks that can cause damage to building and telecommunication infrastructure. Some areas of Suriname also have poor drainage, which can cause flooding and damage, especially if there are higher water levels in the rivers. What are the downstream impacts or consequences of the pathways we just explored? Loss and damage of infrastructure and assets may lead to financial losses, and it can also pose a health risk, even resulting in loss of life. For example, if people are in buildings or houses that are vulnerable to climate impacts when an event occurs. Who or what would be more exposed to these impacts? In Suriname, people who would be more exposed are people and infrastructure on the coast, and people located in areas that are prone to flooding, storms, and high winds. What can increase the vulnerability of these impacts? One factor would be less protective infrastructure. So again, a lack of infrastructure such as a dike or a seawall or a barrier that can protect buildings and telecommunication infrastructure from climate hazards. Outdated drainage systems. Many are not well maintained in Suriname due to lack of building and civil regulations and finances, which can be an issue and can increase vulnerability to flooding. And finally, building material that is susceptible to weather conditions such as high humidity, saltwater intrusion, or storms and heavy winds. Let's explore a case study. Meet Michael. He lives on the coast in northern Paramaribo. There was a recent storm event with record high winds and the coastal area flooded. After the storm, many houses and buildings, including Michael's, have been flooded, and many wooden houses have even been destroyed from the high winds. Telephone poles have also been damaged or have toppled over in the high winds, leaving the community without the ability to communicate with one another or emergency responders.